and the community in Israel from the Council of Higher Education. We are very fortunate to have Professor Ayelet with us today, and I'm sure we will all learn a lot from her insights and experience. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ayelet Baram-Tsabari, who will talk to us about the relevance of science education to science-informed behavior, the case of COVID-19. Her talk will last for around 40 minutes, which will be followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. So, yeah, over to you, Ayelet.
Hello, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm actually really excited to be here. Here it's 8:30 in the morning, and I put a big sign on my door at my working space, do not interrupt, because it's the summer vacation and there's 3 kids running around here. So hopefully it will go well. But I'm really happy to see you, and thank you for all who just opened their cameras. It's much nicer to actually see your faces. So I'm gonna share my presentation, but just to make sure, I know Zoom is not the best for this, but if you have comments or questions or clarifications during the talk, you can also open your mic and just say what you have to say. You don't have to wait to the 20 minutes in the end. It would be more like a conversation, but also if you have something to say that you want, to wait, just write it down and we'll discuss it later. Okay, so I hope you're gonna be provocated, but by what I'm going to tell you. Let's see. Okay, can you wave if you see my presentation? Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about the relevance of science education to science-informed behavior, specifically in the case of COVID-19. And what I'm also going to talk about is the lack of relevance. So when there's no relevance, so it seems, of science education to science-informed behavior. And before I do that, I want to introduce you to the type of work we do in my research group, because I'm a science communication researcher within a science education faculty. So the type of questions we ask are, for example, what is the quality of science-related information available online in different languages? And we study that, for example, by exploring the increasingly large-scale data from science communication settings. All this group that you see here, we are auditing together Google search to characterize the quality and accessibility of science information and misinformation available in different languages, actually 21 languages. The lead is asking, can citizen science projects serve as pedagogy for science education? So citizen science are cases in which public participates in research, but not as subjects who are being studied, but as researchers themselves. So she's asking, can public participation in science be used as a pedagogy for geography and citizenship education? So students and teachers are mapping together and participating in authentic research. Yael is asking, is science coverage inherently boring, for example? So when published on the same media platform, is there a difference in the public's engagement with stuff that scientists write about science and stuff that the organic journalists write? And what she found is that in many of the cases, there is no significant difference in the views and the time people spend there and the comments they write. Zipporah is asking how to support scientists in communicating science more effectively. And we developed together tools like the jargonizer that helps people. It just highlights rare jargon or rare words that people might not know. So scientists can change these words, or at least be aware people might not know them. And we also connected that with ChatGPT, so they would get feedback when they write text for wide publics. Inbal is asking, does generative AI support informed public engagement with science and evidence-based decision-making? We're just starting this one. And Yael is asking, do people who know more science make better science-related decisions? And this is what we're going to talk about today. So I will start with the assumption. Science education in recent decades has become mandatory, as you know, for all students in many, many countries, under the assumption that it has some value for their lives outside of school. The communal disciplinary worldview is that science literate individuals make better, more logical and informed decisions. One place you can see this communal assumption is in the OECD. When they give the framework for PISA, they write, given that knowledge of science contributes significantly to individuals' personal, social, and professional lives, an understanding of science is thus central to a young person's preparedness for life. So this is a given. But I find it really ironic that there is little direct evidence for that given, that science education helps people make evidence-based decisions. Education, as I see it, is ultimately about transfer. But with the exception of modest and isolated gains in conceptual knowledge, it is not clear that these campaigns for science literacy have enhanced people's ability to function in a world where conflicting health advice clutter the internet. Research is filtered through political screens, and the media strip context from scientific claims. Moreover, it appears to be a matter of faith among policymakers and researchers that high-quality science education will result in producing students and thus citizens who can successfully navigate science-related civic issues as they arise later in their lives. What is personal usefulness? When can science education become personally useful for people? We're talking about instances where science education can help people solve personally meaningful problems in their lives and directly affect their material and social circumstances, shape their behavior, and inform their most significant practical and political decisions. What I'm not talking about when I'm talking about personal usefulness of science education, I do not mean to things that are related to STEM careers or serving as gatekeepers for future studies, like what math education does, for example. Or, also acts as cultural capital. So the fact that I learned advanced physics is giving me some advantage because people view me as smart, but does the advanced physics itself help me in making decisions in my life? So when I'm thinking about personal usefulness, I'm thinking about it as a case of transfer. Science education becomes useful if people identify it as relevant to their needs and choose to use content or practices or scientific dispositions and ways of knowing that they learn in science education to new and challenging contexts in their lives. So they use the science that they learned in science education to make sense of novel science-related situations. Now we have to remember that while people make decisions and are trying to use content and skills and ways of knowing that they learned in science education, much of the evaluation of science in everyday life is not evaluation of the correctness of what is being told, because we are dependent on other people's knowledge and on factors that are outside of our own cognitive agency. This is called epistemic dependence. So non-scientists and also scientists cannot avoid some epistemic dependence on experts. And in the words of Norris, non-scientist belief or disbelief in scientific propositions is not based on direct evidence for or against those propositions, but rather on reasons for believing or disbelieving the scientists who assert them. Okay, so we're not talking only about using the content we learned to see if the new content is true or to learn new content. We also think about science education as a way to understand to evaluate the science that we need and the sources for the science that we need. The ability of lay people to reach informed decisions is usually not based on a first-hand evaluation of what is true, but on a second-hand evaluation of who knows what and whom to trust. Brome and Goldman argued, they used the theory of bounded rationality that public's limited understanding of science leads people to make science-related decisions primarily by using quick heuristics, a phenomenon they called a bounded understanding of science. So it's really important to remember that when we move from science education and its nice context of a captive audience, and we take these questions to public understanding of science, to the big world of people meeting science in their lives, many times the decisions people have to do or to make are not, is this correct, but should I believe it? Should I believe the person who told me that? So I'm trying here to bridge science education and the idea of science literacy with science communication and the ideas about public engagement with science. And this is not an easy bridging because science education makes a really optimistic assumption that if science is taught properly, people who encounter science in their everyday lives can acquire the knowledge to make informed, scientifically based decisions. But empirical evidence from the field of public engagement with science indicates that people derive meaning from the science they encounter in their lives using different narratives based on culturally relevant prior knowledge that may or may not include science. So while science education makes very optimistic assumptions, public engagement with science shows us not very optimistic empirical data. And then came COVID. And I used COVID-19, I think as many other people, as a test case for asking questions within science communication. And specifically, what I'm going to show you now was done together with the PhD student, Yael Rosenblum. So the big question is, does science education improve the ability of citizens to engage with science in their daily lives? And the COVID-19 pandemic provides a really appropriate context for empirically studying this question, as it exposed everyone to science-related decision-making, not only people who really care about science or really interested in science. In a series of surveys that I'm going to tell you about in a second, of Hebrew-speaking adults, we presented participants with authentic and timely dilemmas concerning social distancing during COVID-19. And specifically, we asked them how science education and personal commitment interact with adherence to social distancing guidelines in authentic scenarios during the COVID-19 pandemic. A little bit about our methodology. How do we measure science-informed behavior? For this is a very tricky question, and I'm just going to show you what we did. We looked at adherence to social distancing guidelines based on culturally adapted dilemmas as a measure for recognizing and accepting expert consensus. We used different dilemmas for different types of audiences. For example, the number of guests at weddings, visiting elderly family members, sending one's child to school after sharing an elevator with a verified COVID-19 infected individual, and more. We looked at the stance people took, but also at justifying the chosen behavior, using health or science-related arguments as a measure for identifying science as relevant to the issue, and using relevant science knowledge. For example, we asked people, if you had to convince your parents or spouse, what would you tell them? What arguments would you use? And we were really interested to see if people would use health or science-related arguments. We also asked people to choose credible information sources as a measure for the capacity to make evaluative judgment about the source expertise. We asked people, if you could consult with someone regarding this decision, who would you consult with? What source of information would you turn to? So these were our measures for science-informed behavior. That's what we were trying to predict using science education and science knowledge. How did we measure knowledge? First, we measured general science knowledge using closed-ended factual knowledge questions, antibiotics kill viruses as well as bacteria, and it is the father's gene that decides whether the baby is a boy or a girl. We also used the question to study science knowledge in the context of COVID-19. We asked, it was true at the time, of course it changed later, anyone who encountered a verified patient for COVID-19 must self-quarantine until 14 days from the encounter passed, even if the person exposed had been going about their regular activities for several days. Do you think self-quarantine will help at this point, and why? Okay, so we use the answers of people to these questions to understand their science knowledge in the context of COVID-19. And this question was modified based on the particular context. So if it was an interaction in a soccer match, we used the question this way. Full answers addressed reducing exposure, incubation periods of the virus, or that the carrier of the virus can be asymptomatic. We also looked at using science concepts correctly within this answer, the number, the level, and the correctness of use of these concepts. Data collection and samples. So we used 3 samples. I'm going to introduce them to you. So these are the main timeline for the first few months of the pandemic in Israel. You see that the first COVID-19 patient was discovered in the end of February. And then we have the first lockdown in April, the second lockdown in September, and the third lockdown in December, okay? A representative sample of the general population using an online questionnaire was collected in the beginning of November. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, so people who are very, very religious, collected by phone because many of them don't use internet. A representative sample of religious Haredi subgroups, Haredi or Ultra-Orthodox, was collected also in November. And just in the beginning of the pandemic, just when nobody knew anything in Israel, we collected a convenience sample of sports fans that was collected via online questionnaire and relevant forms and social media. That happened in March. So let's view some of the findings. Education indicators played only a really minor role in explaining individuals' adherence to social distancing guidelines. So what you see here is just Pearson correlation. And this line here is the 0.1. So beneath it, it's really no correlation at all. And above it, it's still, let's say, here it's rather small. Here it becomes more significant, okay? So these are correlations between demographics. This is demographics, the knowledge, and the indicators of science-informed behavior that we measure. And they are all correlated with the highest level of science education. And what you can see here is that, of course, general education is like moderately relevant or correlated with the highest level of science education. And choosing credible sources is also correlated to some degree in 2 of the 3 samples. Adherence to social distancing guidelines, while significant, is also almost no correlation at all. So you can see that there's very, very minor role of science education in explaining any of the behaviors and the knowledge. What you see here is, again, the correlations between demographics, knowledge, and indicators for science-informed behaviors. So this is the behavior down there, and the adherence to social distancing guidelines. And you can see that we see in one of the samples, there's a correlation with gender. In 2 of the samples, there's a correlation between knowing a little bit about the context of COVID-19 and adhering to social distancing guidelines. And also in one of the samples, rather moderate correlation between choosing credible sources and actually adhering to the social guidelines. Also, what you see here is that people who use health-related justifications are also people who adhere more to the social distancing guidelines. Now, let's take all this together, all the 3 samples together, and try to predict self-reported behavior for the entire cohort. This is a model predicting public adherence to social distancing guidelines based on demographic variables, choosing credible sources, and science knowledge in the context of COVID-19. And what you can see here, you see in yellow, is that science education is not significant in any of these models. Okay, you see here 4 models based on demographics and knowledge of COVID-19, based off demographics and choosing credible sources, and based on all of them, and it's not significant in any of them. What you see here is trying to use science education to predict behavior. And we really see that science education alone did not significantly explain any of the variance in choosing credible sources, in adherence to social distancing guidelines, or in the use of health-related justifications. Okay? So we did see that science knowledge, maybe not science education, but science knowledge and science knowledge in the context of COVID-19 plays some role in the decisions how to act in directing behavior. But what happens when people have other commitments? So I would like to introduce you to Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball team. Maccabi Tel Aviv is a very good basketball team. It's a EuroLeague, had been EuroLeague champion for quite a few times. And on March 2020, it just came back from Valencia, where it played in Spain. And 12 days after they came back, the Ministry of Health just issued a really bizarre, how would I say it? Not recommendation, but requirement, that everyone who came back from Italy or Spain for the last 14 days would self-quarantine. Now, today, of course, this seems completely natural to us, but then it was like a complete shock to everyone. Now, this affected Maccabi Tel Aviv players as well, because they just came back 12 days ago from Valencia. But they had that evening a game against Anadolu Efes from Turkey at home in Tel Aviv, and they didn't want to miss the match. So they deliberated, and all the country and all the fans, the basketball fans, deliberated with them. Should they go into quarantine and lose the game, just not show up to the game and get a technical loss, or should they just go to the game and disregard the requirement? And that's actually what they did. They came that evening to the game, they won the game, and a day later, they took the plane to go and play against Red Star Belgrade, which turned out to be the last game of that season because of COVID-19. So while all this was happening, we issued an online survey, and we submitted it to Israeli sports fans forums, Facebook groups, and websites on March 5 to 8. So this is exactly when all this was going on. And we asked the participants, do you think the Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball players should have self-quarantined after returning from Spain? So how do science education and science knowledge interact in this case with motivated reasoning in an authentic scenario that involved individuals' group commitments during the COVID-19 pandemic? If science education supports science knowledge and literacy, and these supports informed decision-making, as we would like to imagine, we should see that people with more science education, more science knowledge, and more knowledge about COVID-19 should understand and support the guidelines to prevent spreading the disease further. The sample was made of 264 sports fans, so that was a convenient sample from the forums. It was mainly males, young ones mainly, many of them with higher education, and 40% were Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball fans. The rest weren't. And just to give you a comparison, a comparison to the general Israeli sports fan population, these responders included slightly more males and less educated individuals. Our methods, we looked at general science knowledge, so 3 closed-ended questions, and we asked them about the knowledge about the coronavirus. We didn't know much about the coronavirus back then, so it was an open question on the sports-related authentic situation. We just asked them. On March 4th, the Ministry of Health instructed Maccabi Tel Aviv soccer fans who attended the game on February 24th to self-isolate for 14 days due to COVID-19 case that was identified in the crowd. Why and how isolation could help at this point over a week after the potential infection? That was the question. So, how do you think the sports fans responded to these questions? I just remind you, the question was, do you think the Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball players should have remained in self-quarantine after returning from Spain? So people who were not fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv, 85% of them thought that the players should have stayed in quarantine. Among the people who were fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv, only 40% thought they should stay in quarantine. So we can see quite easily here that other issues rather than science knowledge and understanding of the health situation are at play here. So what are the associations between being a Maccabi Tel Aviv fan or not fan, science knowledge, and stance on the need for self-quarantine? What you see here is what we see among people who are not fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv. As you already expect, science education was not correlated with adherence to social distancing guidelines at all. But general science knowledge was. And knowledge in the context of COVID-19, as much knowledge that we had there, does. Okay, so we see some pretty solid relations between general science knowledge and knowledge in the context of COVID-19 and understanding and supporting adherence to social distancing guidelines. But what happens when we look at the fans of the basketball team? These are the fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball team. And you can see that all the correlations that we saw among the non-fans go out of the window. There are no correlations between knowledge, general knowledge, or knowledge in the context of COVID-19 and adherence to social distancing guidelines when you are a fan. So sports fans' science knowledge is relevant to their stance on COVID-19 guidelines, but only if they don't care very much who wins. This means they might have the relevant science knowledge, but don't have the right epistemic goal. They want to win, not to reach an evidence-based decision. These results underscore the relevance of science knowledge when taking an informed position on science in everyday life, but also the overwhelming power of motivated reasoning when negotiating COVID-19 guidelines. Let's talk a little bit about motivated reasoning. Although it is really tempting to assume that individuals who do not accept the scientific consensus are anti-science or uninformed, empirical data do not support this claim. Where there is religious or political polarization, like stem cell research or the Big Bang or human evolution or climate change, we see polarization is greater among individuals with more years of general education and individuals with greater scientific knowledge, as measured by both science course attainment and scores on science literacy tests. Now, this is true for Americans. Many of the things were not repeated among Europeans, or anyway, not explained to the same level by among Europeans. But what we see here is that in a very ideological, flammable situation, people actually use their greater knowledge and greater education as a way to convince themselves that they are right. So greater knowledge in this case is a greater capacity and better toolbox for convincing yourself and others that your side is right. I just want to show you that this works also in Israel, not just in the States. These are two other papers that we had about COVID-19 data. So what you see here is one of the surveys, as I told you, involved ultra-Orthodox Jews who are extremely religious people, and they use an independent system of education of religious schools as seminars. And in November, we asked them, do you think the Ministry of Health's decision to close all schools and universities was right? And you can see that only 5% said no, the Ministry of Health's decision was wrong to close all schools and universities. So there's 95% understanding and agreeing that it's a good idea to close the schools in order to keep social distancing. And we can maybe infer from this that they understand the dynamics of the pandemic, how people are being infected, why it's dangerous to get into exponential growth in numbers of patients. But what happens when we ask them about religious schools and seminars? So the same people in the same survey, in the same day, will ask, do you think the Israeli Ministry of Health decision to close all religious seminars was right? And you can see that 77% said no. So again, we can see that this has nothing to do, or almost nothing to do, with knowledge, with understanding of epidemiology, with understanding of virology, with understanding of the science background or science context in which social distancing is being initiated. Just not to finish with a completely pessimistic view, I'm going to show you one optimistic view. What you see here are the answers of people to the question, suppose you have an adult parent or grandparent living alone. Will you visit them in the coming days? And what you see here are the people who say, I will visit them. What you see here is the people saying, I will not visit them. And here are the people who say, I will visit them, but we will maintain social distancing. So this is a growing adherence to social distancing guidelines. And what you can see that also grows here are the quality of the arguments and the proportion of health-related justifications. So people who adhere more to the guidelines are also justifying them more with science or health-related justifications. You see here as well, will you celebrate Passover? This is a very important holiday in Israel, Passover dinner with your elderly family members. And again, you can see that when we see growing adherence to guidelines, we also see growing proportion of health-related justifications and growing argument quality score. So let's summarize. What is the relevance of science education to public engagement with science? The level of formal science instruction received, we couldn't see any significant explanation of any of the variants in participants' adherence to social distancing guidelines, use of health-related justifications for doing so, or identifying credible sources of information. General science knowledge and science knowledge in the context of COVID-19 did play some role in predicting adherence to social distancing guidelines, but this relationship disappeared when other values, such as supporting one's support team, dominated. One of the main goals of science education is educating scientifically literate people who make informed science-based decisions. However, do they inform science-based decisions? This is more a normative statement than a claim supported by evidence, in my view. One could expect that people who have more years of formal science instruction would be better at acquiring science information as required, and would be better equipped to use this knowledge to inform their actions. In practice, our results do not support this assumption. Our study demonstrates the limited long-term transferability of science education in the personal lives of non-scientists. And I think also that our findings support the need to develop approaches to enhance the coherence between the stated goals of science education, which is really to support effective public engagement with science, and its actual effect on behavior. Thank you very much, and I'm actually very much looking forward to our discussion.
So thank you very much, Mr. Ali, for your interesting talk. And I'm sure we all must have various questions and queries for you. And we have like more than 20 minutes left for Q&A. So I request all the audience members, both who are available online and offline, to ask your questions. You can also, people who are online, they can put their queries in the chat box, and we'll try to also take.
Hi, Prof. I'm already here.
Sorry, I don't hear.
Is this audible? Can you hear us?
Yes, now I can.
Okay. Hi, Prof. This is Rajeshri. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I had this question about what are the areas that you think that citizens are more likely to be, adamant about the beliefs? Like we know that if given the ease of following a convenience to their belief system, they would they would refuse to follow certain science-informed decisions. So what are some areas, like apart from healthcare, where you see such dominance over relying on their own personal beliefs or convenience?
That's a really interesting question. So let me see that I understood it well. So what are areas in which people are more susceptible, in a way, to use their worldviews or personal commitments to make decisions rather than rely on evidence?
Yes.
So I have two opposite answers. We should think about them together. So on one hand, it's quite obvious that when people have a strong commitment, they're more likely to use it. So if I really care about, for example, if I'm the main caregiver of my elderly parents, then I have a commitment for keeping them not just safe, but also in good health, and bring them food and so forth. So of course, when I'm in a situation like this, I use my commitments and I use my understanding of their needs to make the decision, not just this abstract social distancing guidelines, okay? So once it becomes personal, once it becomes something that I need to consider different values, then of course other values might guide what I'm doing. I'll give you another example. Let's say one of the dilemmas we used was that your kid used the elevator together with one of the neighbors who later you found out was a positive with COVID-19. Now, at that time, the recommendation said that it's only after exposure of 15 minutes that you have to go into a self-isolation. Now, your kid went in the elevator only for 3 minutes, maybe not 15 minutes. what should you do? Will you send them to school? You will not send them to school. The recommendations don't make you keep them at home. But if you send them to school after you know they were exposed, that's not very good citizenship, isn't it? But on the other hand, also, if you keep them at home, maybe you can't go to work for 2 weeks. So I think when science and health guidelines meet actual life, there's many values and many reasons that you have to use as trade-offs. So I think for sure, when there's personal commitment or personal relevance, then you are less likely to use only science guidelines, because it's not only science guidelines that are relevant there. This is one thing. Another thing is that we know that when ideology or religion are involved, you are much more likely to take your commitments to your group of peers and then look at the science. With all due respect, if all my family and all my friends and all the people I believe in and all the people I care about think that evolution didn't happen, then the fact that some scientist that I don't know shows me a graph is just not a very strong motivator for me to listen to the scientists. So that's another place where people would prefer other commitments and identity over science. On the other hand, just to make us to make the issue more complicated, we also saw in one of our studies that when people have personal reason to care, they also pay more attention to the information and use less misinformation. So, for example, if you ask people why they did or did not adhere to some guidelines, and you look at the level of misinformation that people use. Okay, so people say because kids are not infected by COVID-19, for example, okay, which is misinformation and was misinformation at the time as well. So you see that people that have a reason to care, that have personal relevance, would use less misinformation. They might say, I'm sending my kid anyway because the kid needs to go to school, or I'm sending my kid anyway because I need to go to work. But they would be less likely to say, I'm sending my kid because kids don't get COVID. Well, people who don't have kids might say that more often because they don't care. Sorry for a long and complicated answer, but it was a complicated question.
Thank you. I just have one small follow-up question based on what you said about like when they should have the family telling them some information and a scientist telling them some information. So like there's this idea of cognitive environment that is more prevalent in, I think, the scientific community, where we share our ideas so that no misinformation or like no wrong evidence gets out. So how do we create such cognitive environment when we are positioned or we identify ourselves as citizens and with other citizens around us, not at the individual, more at the collective goal level?
Just make sure that I understood the question. You're asking, in such a cognitive heterogenic environment, let's say, that some people are more likely to believe non-science authorities, what should we do as scientists?
Yes, like the idea of cognitive environment here I'm talking is about where we share our ideas within, amongst each other in a community, where we make sure that no wrong information or like factually incorrect information is like assimilated or transferred outside the community as well. So such cognitive environment, how can it exist when we are citizens outside a non-scientific community?
I don't think we can expect that communities outside the scientific community would behave and have the same epistemic goals like the scientific community. I don't think it's a reasonable expectation. many people don't think that science is the best way to understand the world. We think that science is maybe the best way to describe and understand the physical world. It should be acknowledged that some people don't. And I think I'm coming from science communication. As a science communicator, I think the question would be, how do we most effectively help people within the framework that they use to understand the world? I don't think we have any chance. Again, I'm not sure I understood the question, but if I understand it correctly, then I don't think we can cause other people to change their framework of whom to believe and what's the right authority about understanding the world. I think what we can do is, through education and through better science communication, help people understand when, within their framework, when they are in a science-related situation, how they should approach it, how they should evaluate expertise. So there are so many people in our society anyway who say that they are representative of science and they are not. So how to evaluate expertise within science and outside of science, and how to spot charlatans and hopefully avoid some misinformation. I think that's maybe a realistic, big but realistic goal for science education.
Thank you.
There's questions in chat. People who have put the questions in chat, they can also unmute and ask them online.
Okay, so I think.
Ulfa, do you want to?
Yeah. Hello, Professor. It was a nice talk. My question is, I wanted to know, like once we identify that people have certain choices or they have certain belief systems, what should be the part of the intervention if we want them to start making their choices based on some evidence?
Yeah, so this is very much connected with the last question, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah, so a good question, a tough question. Okay, so I think this is my I'm going to tell you what I think. It's not that, everybody think the same. I think our best bet when people have a different belief system, a different worldview, is to work with people within their communities, or people they trust, or people they identify with. I think in my context, in the Israeli context, if I go and speak with ultra-Orthodox Jews, most likely they will completely disregard what I'm saying, no matter what I'm saying. And because I'm a stranger, I'm an outsider, and there's no reason to believe me. If I'm from the Technion, and the Technion is one of the 100 best universities in the world, and so forth, I don't think that is a type of credentials that are impressive for them. I think what would be impressive for them is that someone that looks like them, and they feel that care about them, and someone on their side that they identify with would tell them that. So I think working with people within the communities, and community can be a big thing. It doesn't have to be like a village. It can be like a big thing. So working with people within the communities, with experts, and developing expertise within the communities, I think that's our best bet with people who do not accept us. I don't know the situation in India. Maybe in India, everyone holding scientific authority to a very high regard. But in Israel, although people hold science in general to a very high regard, and they don't have much against it, when it comes to changing what I'm doing because someone I don't know told me, I think it should come from someone I trust. So this really brings us to the issue of trust. And I think trust is extremely important within science communication. It's not something we work on in science education, maybe rightfully so. In science education, we try to work on knowledge and skills and attitudes and thinking about myself as a learner. And we don't try to tell people trust this one or trust that one. But we as experts who want to intervene, who want people to persuade people or give them the tools to make decisions that we think are better for them, I think trust is the key. And I think there was another.
Yeah, but there is a second question by Harold. Harold, you want to ask your question? Sure, I do. There is a network.
Shut down. Yeah, disconnect the mobile.
Aspects of emotions and science reasoning. Our people are just trying to avoid stress, and that's why they don't believe that something is happening, which is a really good question. So I never looked into stress and I didn't study stress or emotions. What I did a little bit was looking at the personal relevance of the dilemmas to certain people. So assuming that someone who has kids, actually it's more relevant to them if the kids go to school or not, or someone who is attending to elderly parents is more interested, or it's more relevant to them if they can meet the parents or not. But I didn't look at emotions, so I can answer just not based on research, but based on my understanding. I think emotions are a useful tool for us to tell us what to do, and we use them all the time to tell us what to do, when to eat, and when to drink, and whom to marry. In some cases, not all. But so I wouldn't try to dissociate emotions from decisions. In a way, I think it's inevitable that emotions and the social context affect our decisions in real life, and an attempt to clean them, to view them as noise or hijacking. I'm not saying it's not good. I think it's not. We just can't do it. Humans also have emotions. Humans also, everything is plays out within social context when it's real life. And so I think what we should do is work with these emotions and accept that they're there and work with them. So if people are really afraid of what will happen to their kids if they stay at home for 2 months, we should address this fear. I mean, it's a reasonable fear. And if I'm thinking about anti-vaxxers, okay, people that are avoiding vaccinating their kids because they fear of what will happen to them, I don't think we can dissociate the fear and do anything that would stop the fear. I think what we can do is accept that they are frightened and try to understand why they are frightened, and if we can somehow mitigate this feeling of terror, if it's by intervention that allows them to ask questions for someone they trust, or is it by giving them data if they need data, or is it by being more transparent about the process in which the vaccination was approved. Of course, there's people who are climate deniers and the vaccine deniers, and we can't do much about them. But I'm not interested in those extremists. Most of the people, they don't have very, very strong feelings about these things, but they are afraid when they take these decisions. So I think we should say, just like religion, just like ideology, emotion is not something we can clean off. We should understand what people are feeling, why they are feeling.
Related to what Harold asked, so you talked about motivated reasoning and emotions, so what is common to all is death, right? So have you looked at how people, I mean, in your study group, whether anybody who had death in the family, which was caused by COVID, and how their correlation is to science knowledge or adherence to social guidelines? Because that would be an interesting, I mean, it could be a fear, the emotion could be fear, but death is reality. And we are scared of that, irrespective of our beliefs or, sect you follow or whatever.
Yeah.
So any insight into that in your study?
No, in my study, no insight about that. We didn't ask this question. We did try to ask not about death, but how familiar they were personally. So if they knew someone who got sick themselves or something like that, because at that situation, it's not like today that everybody in Israel maybe had COVID at some point, but at that first year, many people didn't. So most people didn't. It was something to be avoided. So we did try to see if people had personal contact with people who got sick or severely sick, and the numbers weren't big enough for us to do anything. So it's a really interesting question, but I can't answer it.
Sure. And another question I had is do you have any suggestion, for example, to bridge the gap between science education and communication? Any suggestion about pedagogical changes that needs to be done? Or because this is I have an interest, I don't know if the time will permit, but I had this interesting incident, that I wanted to tell you. So in India, we make yogurt at home. So it's made from milk, and then we use the culture that is already there, and when I talk to my friends, when I was doing postdoc in US, and I talked to my friends and I said I made yogurt at home, and they're like, how can you do that? They're always science engineers, they are the postdocs, and they were like, how do you do it? And I said, yeah, I just take some yogurt from and then put it in the milk and put it in the correct temperature, and then it sets. So that gap is there even among people who are science educated. So how do we change that? Do you have any recommendations or suggestions?
Okay, so first of all, I don't think we'll ever close this gap. I think when it's not personally relevant, then there's many things we don't know. So you and I, we know a little more or much more about science because that's of interest for us. And I know really nothing about sewing and about carpentering and other things that other people know much about. And they might view me as let's close the gap for Ayelet about all these really important jobs that she has no idea about. So first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that different people are interested in different things. And for us as people who are interested in science or in technology, this is really weird, but this is the situation. And they are allowed to be interested in something else. So that's for one. The question, I think the main question here is what people really, really need to know in order to make effective decisions in their lives and get their goals. So achieve their own goals. I think the main question in the example that you gave is, if I wanted to make a yogurt, would I know how to do it? Would I have a friend to ask? Would I even have the idea that I can do it if I wanted? Would I know to search for it and find the right thing on YouTube that would tell me how to do it? If I do, then I think it's not a big deal that I don't at the moment, because there's so many things I don't know. So in a way, I think what we can do in science education that we're not doing now very well is to work with students on their epistemic networks. So understanding who knows what in their epistemic network, who they should ask about what, and how people can together help them get the information they need or skills they need. Understanding that most of the time we don't work in isolation in social realities. So it makes complete sense that your friend would ask you and you would ask your friend about something else. And the second thing is really to work with kids on lifelong learning skills. So how to find information. Well, first of all, identify that the situation they're in is related to science, understand how to find information and understand it, and how to evaluate it. I would say these are the major things that we as science educators can give our students.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Ram, I don't think we hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, you're muted, yeah, Ram.
Yeah, I may be audible.
Yeah, yeah. Now.
This brings us to the end of our session. I would like to thank Professor Ayelet once again for taking out time and sharing her knowledge and expertise with us today. I also thank all of the participants for joining us here today in this lively discussion. And so this is, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you all for coming. Bye, Shija.